You know how a house feels after a funeral. The food is still out. Somebody wrapped the ham in aluminum foil. Cake plates are stacked in the sink. Foil pans sit on the counter. And there's a casserole dish nobody has returned yet because returning dishes means the visiting is over. It means the folding chairs can go back to the church. It means the house has become whatever it's going to be now that the person who held it together is gone. You're in the kitchen because that's where people end up after death, at least in the South. They stand around the table. They drink coffee they barely taste. They talk about paperwork because paperwork gives their hands something to do. Somebody needs the insurance papers or the cemetery deed or the receipt from the funeral home. Something with a signature on it, something practical. So you open the drawer near the table, the drawer everybody knows, but nobody has really gone through. It sticks halfway. You pull once, stop, then pull again with both hands. The whole thing gives with a wooden groan that sounds too loud in a house where everybody has been speaking softly for 3 days. At first, it looks like ordinary family clutter, a church fan from an old revival, a few birthday cards, an envelope full of obituaries, yellowed and brittle around the edges, and a little notebook with the corners worn smooth. And there's a small Bible with papers tucked between the pages. Then you find the book with the crackled black cover. Then another, smaller, tied shut with red string. Then a cheap printed charm book, the kind somebody could have bought by mail or picked up from a shop that sold oils and candles and dream books. Things respectable people pretended they didn't know about. Under all of it is a 3-ring binder. That one is newer, plastic cover, notebook paper, handwritten pages. There's herbs listed in one section, moon signs in another, candle colors, saints, planetary days, psalms, old remedies, graveyard notes, a protection working copied in blue ink, and a page titled Things That Worked. That's when the drawer changes. You thought you were looking for paperwork. Now you're looking at a record of what people tried when the doctor had done what he could do, when the preacher had prayed, when the family had talked the problem to death, and the trouble was still sitting there. The Bible has births, deaths, funeral cards, and folded newspaper clippings pressed between the pages. The receipt book has cough syrup, burn salve, floor wash, and a note about washing the door after a bad visitor leaves. The charm book has printed prayers and cures for bleeding, thieves, sickness, cattle, robbers, witches, and trouble at the house. And the little black book has seals and names and warnings written in hand that get smaller the farther back it goes. The binder has a newer hand to it, the witch hand. The one that didn't inherit every word but still understood the habit. You may not know what every page means. You may not know who copied each charm, who tied the string around the little book, or who decided some things belonged in the Bible, while other things needed to be hidden underneath it. But you know this much. Somebody in that house was keeping track of things. Somebody prayed. Somebody worked spells. Somebody tested remedies and copied charms, saved formulas and wrote down names, and remembered which things helped when life got ugly. That's when the drawer stops looking like storage. It starts looking like a record nobody was ready to read until they needed it. I'm Papa G, and this is the Feral Folklorist. And today we're talking about the book in the drawer, family Bibles, hoodoo receipt books, charm books, grimoires, formula books, and witches' books of shadows. These are private working records people kept when sickness and money trouble and death and fear and prayer and magic all met at the same kitchen table. A working book often carried a plain name before anyone called it magic. It might have been a Bible, a receipt book, a household notebook, maybe a farmer's almanac with notes in the margins, a school copybook, or a ledger, or a stack of loose papers just tied up with ribbon, or maybe a printed chapbook kept with folded linens. Later, it might have been a binder, a spiral notebook, or a photocopied packet, or even a computer folder with a name boring enough that nobody in the family would think to open it. The materials changed from one century to the next, but the reason stayed familiar. People wrote things down because the person who knew the work might forget, or move away, or fall sick, or even die. A household needed a way to remember what had been done before. In many older homes, the Bible carried the official weight. It held the family records, births and baptisms, marriages, deaths, family lines, funeral cards, locks of hair, maybe pressed flowers. There were newspaper clippings and photographs, and little scraps of paper could end up all between its covers. Before modern vital records were dependable everywhere, a family Bible could become the place where somebody wrote the date because the family needed a reliable record. That made the Bible more than a book for Sunday reading. It became the book that held the family's names. And once a book holds the family's names and the family's dead, people begin trusting it with other serious matters. A Bible might be opened at a sick bed. It might be read over someone dying. It might be pressed under a pillow or carried for protection, or set in an open room, or marked at a psalm that meant for peace or justice or childbirth, protection, or a hard road ahead. In hoodoo, Appalachian practice, rural folk religion, powwow, and plenty of household magic, scripture could be prayer, charm, witness, and a tool all at the same time. But the drawer doesn't stop at the Bible. Another old branch in this tradition is the receipt book. In older usage, a receipt meant a recipe, a remedy, a formula, or a set of directions. Early modern households in Britain and Europe kept handwritten books filled with cookery, medicine, distilling, household management, cosmetics, maybe animal care, how to preserve foods, and practical cures. These books were often compiled by the women of the family, and they gathered material from family and neighbors, other printed books, maybe physicians, apothecaries, servants, and personal trial, what worked and what didn't. These books were used and they were handled. They were often corrected, crossed out, added to, passed down. One remedy might come from a neighbor, another might come from a doctor, another might come from a mother whose judgment nobody questioned. Another might get copied from print and then changed because the first version gave poor results. So when we look at an old receipt book and see different hands, different inks, and different spellings, we're often seeing a household at work. We're seeing people solve problems, fever and burns, preserves, ink, childbirth, a toothache, livestock, a cough that wouldn't leave, a bad smell in the room after a sickness, maybe a wash for the floor, a little line that looks more like a charm than a remedy sitting right beside the medicine because the household wanted every usable option in one place. And that's where charms started showing up. In medieval and early modern manuscripts, charms often appeared in the margins or blank spaces of medical books. They could be added later by readers who copied them from memory because healing often used prayer and plants and spoken words and signs and touch all together. A person with a toothache might get an herbal remedy, a spoken prayer, a sign made over the body, or all three. To the household, that gave them more than one way to deal with pain. These books show how people actually lived with trouble. They ask practical questions. Did the bleeding slow? Did the fever break? Did the cow stand up? Did the thief get found? Did the bad dreams leave the room? And did the baby sleep? Did the house quiet down after the floor was washed? Commonplace books belong in this conversation too. A commonplace book was a gathering place for useful materials like quotations, prayers, recipes, and legal formulas, maybe sermon notes and poems, observations and charms, and anything else the writer might think they would need again. That puts it close to a book of shadows and behavior, even when the religion behind it is different. It's a book that says, I may need this later, so I'm putting it right here where I can find it. Printed charm books widened the access. They took pieces of oral tradition, religious healing, folk medicine, and magical instruction and put them into portable form. A person could buy one, borrow one, hide one, copy from another, or accuse somebody else of having one. A printed page carried its own authority, especially in a world where books suggested learning and literacy and access to knowledge beyond the ordinary household. One of the most important American examples is The Long Lost Friend by Johann Georg Hohmann, first published in America in 1820. It became especially important in Pennsylvania German powwow, sometimes called Brocherei, which is a Christian folk healing tradition for healing, protection, and ordinary human trouble. That book contains prayers, charms, benedictions, amulets and talismans and remedies, and protection against witches and robbers, and cures for people and their cattle and their crops. The book was practical. It belonged to a world where a spoken charm might be used to stop bleeding, where a written line might be carried on the body, where prayer might guard the house, and where the book itself could be treated as a protective object. Then we have the books that made people lower their voices. The sixth and seventh books of Moses carried a different charge. It presented itself as hidden Mosaic magic, full of seals, divine names, spirit art, incantations, and magical authority tied to Moses as a worker of wonders. Its reputation moved through German occult print culture and later into American folk magic worlds, including Pennsylvania German practice, Appalachian magic, hoodoo, and Caribbean-influenced traditions. Some people wanted it, some people trusted it, and some people feared it. Others called it a hex book. That difference is important because working books held different positions in the home and the community. A family Bible could still sit openly on a table, and a receipt book might pass as some sort of household management book. The Long Lost Friend could be defended as Christian healing. The sixth and seventh books of Moses might get wrapped or hidden or whispered about and blamed when trouble got kind of weird. In hoodoo and rootwork, printed books moved through spiritual suppliers and mail order catalogs, candle shops and curio companies, city occult stores, and neighborhood workers. The Bible stood at the center for many practitioners, and other books stood beside it. There were the psalm books, dream books, seal books, formularies, grimoires, catalogs that doubled as instruction manuals, and little pamphlets that taught how to use oils and candles and powders and roots, and colors and names and written petitions. Now, psalms mattered, and they belong here. They've been used in protection and cleansing and justice and blessing and cursing and healing and luck and road opening and peace in the house. The working book tradition also included seals and diagrams and herbal formulas, court case notes and love work, protection work, saints. The list goes on and on. As you can see, there was so much to learn magically by combining all these books, or at least having access to all of them. Now, that's where the grimoires come in. A grimoire is a magical working book, often associated with formal operations, seals and spirit names, divine names, planetary timing. Could be circles and tools and consecrations and invocations and precise instructions. Some grimoires are learned and ceremonial, some are rougher and practical, and some were copied by hand. Most were. Some spread through print, and some claimed ancient authority. A Witch's Book of Shadows belongs in the same broad family, though it has its own modern history. The phrase is most closely tied to Wicca and the mid 20th century world of Gerald Gardner and the covens that followed him. In that setting, A Book of Shadows held rituals, initiatory material, seasonal rites and invocations, circle casting, tool instructions, and the structure of that tradition. In British traditional Wicca, the book was copied within the coven stream, and that copying mattered. It carried lineage, form, and practice. Then the idea moved into broader public witchcraft. By the late 20th century, the Book of Shadows had become a personal magical record for many solitary witches. Some kept it as a ritual book, some treated it like a workbook, some even called it a grimoire. Some kept one book for spells, another for dreams, another for divination and spirit contact. Some used binders because they could move the pages around. Some used plain notebooks because the work mattered more than the cover. The name may be modern, but the habit is old. Now, many people will tell you the difference in a Book of Shadows and a grimoire is usually a grimoire was what was recorded and held by maybe the leader of a spiritual movement or a coven, maybe a high priest or high priestess, where all of the coven's written material was collected all together. And it was something that would be passed down to the next person in charge, so to speak, where a Book of Shadows would most likely be considered something that was personal, done by one person. So a grimoire had many working spells and traditions and rituals that were done by an entire group and then maintained for records for that group. A Book of Shadows could or could not have been passed down to an individual or a child, but it was usually the spells and rituals that worked for that one person. So here we have the family Bible, which recorded who belonged to a family. We have a receipt book, often used in hoodoo, to record household knowledge, a charm book recording prayers and protections, a grimoire recording formal magical operations, a hoodoo worker's notebook recording formulas and petitions and roots and oils, and the Book of Shadows, which recorded the witch's personal working life. They all come from the same need. People wanted a way to save the work before it got lost. A working book changes the way knowledge moves from one person to another. Spoken knowledge has its own power. It lives in the mouth and in the hands and in the body. In the person who knows when the water is hot enough, or when the candle has burned strangely, or when a child is restless, or when the whole room needs work. Spoken knowledge can adjust itself in the moment because the person carrying it knows the difference between the rule and the exception. The problem is that spoken knowledge depends on the person who carries it. When the grandmother dies, the family may still have her notebook, but nobody remembers exactly what she used in it. They may have the recipe, the charm, or the psalm number, but they've lost the person who knew the timing, the tone, the warnings, and the little steps she never bothered to write down. And that's why people kept books. A book gives the next person something to go back to. It holds the date and the ingredients, the prayer, the names, the result, and even the corrections. It lets a worker return to a page after the panic is past and ask a practical question. What did I do last time, and what actually happened? Even then, a book only preserves what somebody wrote. Most working books assume knowledge that never made it to the page. They use shorthand. They leave out small steps. They expect the reader to know what a proper wash is, and which direction to sweep, what kind of oil is meant, which prayer is said aloud, which prayer is whispered, and which working belongs behind a shut door. That's why inherited books can feel so strange. You may have the words, but the teacher's gone. You may have the charm, but you may be missing the tone of it. You may have the remedy, but the person who knew the plant, the season, the dose, and the warning may be already buried. A page can save words. It can't explain what the old worker assumed you already knew. That's where authority enters the matter. A book has authority because someone gave it authority. Sometimes the authority comes from age, sometimes from print, sometimes it comes from religion, and sometimes it comes from the handwriting of a dead person the family still respects. And sometimes it comes from it just brings results. Results matter most in a true working book of spells. A beautiful magical notebook can be a pleasure to own, and there's nothing wrong with good paper and a strong cover and beautiful pressed flowers and careful handwriting or artful pages. Beauty can make a book feel set apart from others. Use gives it weight. A working book earns itself through dates and corrections and substitutions, all the crossed out lines and pasted in notes, and honest records of what happened afterwards. That's true whether we're talking about a root worker's notebook, a witch's book of shadows, a powwow charm book, or a grimoire copied by hand. Keeping records forces the worker to look at what actually happened. That matters because memory can flatter a worker. People remember the success because it felt powerful. They forget the work that fizzled because failure is less fun to retell. They say a spell fixed the problem, then left out the timing, the conditions, the result, and the cost. 6 months later, they're working from emotion instead of evidence. A real working book makes the patterns visible. It tells you that the cleansing settled the house for 3 days, then the trouble came back. It tells you that the love working brought the person closer and brought a fresh set of problems with them. It tells you the protection candle burned steadily, but the dreams moved from the child to the mother. It might tell you the court work helped your nerves, while the legal outcome still required an attorney and documents and a better plan. It might say that rosemary worked better than rue in that house, or that a certain working should be saved for real need because it stirs up more problems than it settles. That kind of truth is worth more than a page full of borrowed correspondences. The magical logic of the working book is also tied to witness. Once something is written down, the page says it happened. This was attempted. This name was spoken. This candle was lit. This prayer was used. This result followed. The book becomes a record of the work and a record of the worker's judgment. That's why people hide them, because they're often like a diary with personal information inside. A working book can contain names and petitions and vows, private prayers, unfinished workings, failed workings, curses, illness notes, things about love, things about court, money trouble, things that get done in desperation. And that kind of information gives access to the worker and the client and the family and the spirits and the history of the house. So it's a lot of personal information. People understood this even when they used plain words for it. A Bible with family records was handled with care because it carried the family. A charm book was guarded because it carried methods. And a grimoire was kept close because it carried names, seals, and operations. A book of shadows was private because it carried the working life of a single witch. Now, these books hold information, but they also raise a practical question. Who has any business using it? Who gets to see it? Who gets to copy it? Who gets to inherit it? Who earned the right to work from it? Those questions are part of the tradition because access has consequences. This is where grimoires and books of shadows overlap in a useful way. Now, a grimoire often gives formal instruction. It may tell you what to prepare, what to say, what name to call, what seal to draw, what hour to use, what tool to consecrate, what order to follow. A book of shadows may include that kind of material, but it also tends to gather the practitioner's lived experience with their spells and their rites and their spirit notes and the seasonal work and the ancestor work, maybe household wards, tarot spreads, formulas to create their own oils, and personal rules that they've come up with themselves and thought they were important to put into the text. One book may preserve the operation, the other may preserve the worker's experience of doing it. So a serious magical record needs both kinds of knowledge. It needs instruction and it needs consequence. It needs the old words and it needs the margin notes that says, this took too long, this worked quickly, this brought trouble, this calmed the house, or this failed because I rushed it. That's where the power of the working book lives. It lives in the relationship between the worker, the work, and what they recorded in the book. Now, that's why older household books are so useful to think about. A receipt book helped the house remember what worked. Where that family Bible held the deaths and the prayers and the grief, it had a sense of belonging to it. It belonged to the family. The charm book stayed pretty close at hand when somebody was scared. A grimoire carried methods that required a steadier hand by someone who was actually learned and practiced. A book of shadows at its best says, this is my work as I received it, tested it, charged it, and answered for it. So that last part matters. Answered for it. A working book preserves responsibility. It reminds the worker that they did this before. It reminds them what they promised. It reminds them what they learned the hard way. And it keeps them from pretending they never knew better. The books stayed because they solved a practical problem. They kept knowledge from dying in a house where knowledge often belonged to one person. That person might have been a grandmother, a mother, a midwife, a root worker, a powwow doctor, a cunning man, a high priestess, a solitary witch, a father who knew charms for livestock, an aunt who knew which prayer to read when a child couldn't sleep, or a neighbor who knew which plant to boil and which matter to leave alone. When that person died, the family was left with the paper, but not the teacher. And that's when the books became difficult. So we go back to who gets the Bible? Who gets the notebook? What is this charm book? Why is this name written here? Why is there a page folded over it? Why did she write never again beside a candle date from 1998? Those are the moments when working books turn from tools into evidence of practice, evidence of secrecy, evidence that the person everybody thought they knew had a second life at the kitchen table, the altar, the bedside, maybe the graveyard gate, or the church pew, or maybe just the garden fence. Families handle that in different ways. Some preserve everything because they feel the weight of what might be lost. Some burn pages because the writing scares them. Some split the books apart so the story feels easier to manage. The Bible goes to the respectable branch of the family. The recipes go to the cook. The photographs go in a shoebox. The charm book sort of disappears. And the grimoire gets called trash by somebody who doesn't know what they're holding. The witch's binder goes into a closet until somebody braver or nosier finds it and knows what to do with it. That's how these books survive in pieces. A loose charm in an envelope, a psalm number written inside the cover of a Bible, a pressed herb tucked into a funeral program, a name paper folded into a receipt book, or a sigil drawn on the back of a photograph. A whole book of shadows labeled garden notes because nobody in that family ever bothered to read about plants. The hiding changes with the century, but the habit sticks around. Now, in older communities, the danger might have been a minister, a neighbor, a doctor, a judge, a rival worker, a member of the family who approved of healing until the wrong book turned up. In modern life, the danger might be ridicule or judgment, or maybe even a custody problem, a workplace trouble, maybe church gossip, even online exposure, or simply having your private spiritual life handled by people with clumsy hands and loud mouths. So the book goes quiet. It gets a false cover. It gets kept in a drawer. It gets locked in a box. It gets scanned and password protected. It gets copied with the names removed. It gets inherited by the one person who will handle it with sense. And that last part is important. Working books often move toward the person who will keep the behavior alive. They may be the eldest child, though just as often it's the one who noticed the book, the one who asked the questions, the one who watched how the candle was pinched out, the one who paid attention when the Bible was open to a certain place, or the one who listened when an aunt said the back door needed washing after a certain visitor left. That person becomes the next hand in the book, and the next hand always changes it. A daughter adds a modern medical warning beside an old remedy. A witch adds tarot spreads to a book that once held only herbs and moon signs. A root worker copies a family prayer into a notebook beside a formula bought from a spiritual supplier. A house that once used a Bible and a receipt book now has a binder with printed pages from the internet, handwritten class notes, photographs of altars, maybe candle reports and graveyard protocols, and a list of what worked during the worst year of somebody's life. That's the modern working book. It's a mixed thing because practice is mixed. It may hold old prayers beside new rituals, folk Catholic saints beside Appalachian charms, or hoodoo oils beside tarot notes. There could be garden lore right beside the planetary signs. Maybe they overlap. It could be candle reports that were actually given to clients if you do work for other people, ancestral offerings and dream notes. Households have always gathered what they could use. The real test is whether the book tells the truth about the work. Did somebody record the result? Did somebody correct the mistake? Did somebody mark the page that caused trouble? Did someone protect the living names written inside it? And did someone close the book when the work was done? That's where the old fear remains. A working book becomes serious because of what gets written in it and what's happening when those pages were made. A binder from an office supply store can carry the record of a divorce working, a deathbed prayer, a house cleansing after violence, a protection right for a child or a blessing after miscarriage. Maybe it's a court case candle or a curse somebody regrets or a love spell that brought exactly what was asked for and not what was actually needed. After that, nobody who knows the story looks at the book the same way. They may still call it a notebook. They may still say it's just her papers or his old Bible or that thing from the drawer, but they handle it differently. They move it carefully. They close it before company comes. They keep living names turned face down, and they give it to the person who understands that curiosity is a poor excuse for touching someone else's work. And if it's found after the worker dies and no one knew about it, the tone in the room changes a bit. Somebody reads too far and gets quiet. Somebody recognizes a name. Somebody sees a date and remembers what happened that week. Somebody closes the cover and says the book can stay, but it needs to stay somewhere other than the bedroom. That's how the folklore survives. It survives as a household rule. The Bible stays wrapped. The charm book stays high on the shelf. The grimoire stays tied shut. The receipt book stays with the person who still knows about plants. The Book of Shadows stays closed until the hand opening it has a reason to do so. Now let's talk about the practical side, because this is where people get foolish fast. If you keep a working book of spells, treat it as a record. Let it hold what you did, when you did it, where the material came from and what changed, and what you learned from the result. A working book should make you a better worker over time. It should help you remember accurately, correct your mistakes, preserve what matters, and keep private work from becoming gossip. Now, the first piece of advice is simple. Choose a book you'll actually use. That sounds obvious, but a lot of people buy a beautiful blank book, then become afraid to write in it. The paper feels too nice. The cover feels too fancy. Every page feels like it has to be perfect. And that's a good way to make a magical object that never earns its keep. Now, I know this from personal experience. It was about 3 years ago that my husband bought me a replica of the book from the movie Practical Magic. Now, the inside is blank, of course, for me to write in, and it even has the front section and the back section, just like in the movie. He did have to order it from a bookmaker in England. It took about 6 weeks to arrive, and I must admit, this year is the first time I have written in it, because it was too pretty to mess up. So it took a lot of courage to finally put something in the big book. I had to go through several rounds of doing junk journaling, paper mache work, decoupaging to get the courage of just put it in the book. And I did have several rounds of slowing down and repracticing the handwriting that I learned in school. And now I'm actually starting to fill it. Fill it may be a strong word. I've gotten some pages in it. It does have 400 pages in the book, so that will take a while. So you just have to be brave, and you can use me as an example. 3 years is a long time to hold on to something so pretty but so empty. It needs your spells, your rituals, your personal experiences to make it into an actual book. A working book needs to take ink and mistakes and crossed out lines and pasted in notes. And it needs folded paper and sometimes even ugly handwriting written at midnight when you're tired. If that means a binder, use a binder or a composition book. Maybe you'll start with one of those and move to a prettier or more formal book later, and copy those things that worked into that book. On the first page, write what the book is for. Keep it very plain. Something like this works. This is my working record. This book holds the practices I have received or tested, charged, answered. Every working recording should have a source and a date and a result. Now, the first page in my book shows the snake swallowing its tail, and inside the circle of the snake, it simply says it's a book of magic. That's on the first page. So it can say, this is my working record. This book holds the practices I've received, I've tested, I've changed, and things I've answered for. Every working recorded here should have a source, a date, and a result, like I said before. That kind of statement tells you what the book is supposed to do. Then organize the book around use. Maybe have a place for material you receive from somewhere else, with the source written down honestly. Have a place for your work you performed with the date and the condition, the materials, a prayer or a charm that was used, any changes you've made to that. A worker who hides failure keeps stepping into the same hole. So record your failures, things that didn't work, and maybe the next person can make it work. So here's something you can do to formalize your book as a ritual object. You would set it on a table with a white candle, a small bowl of salt, a cup of water, and a key. If you work with herbs, add rosemary for memory, bay for authority, a little angelica or rue if those belong to your practice. Leave out anything that doesn't belong to your way of working. The point is to establish the book as a guarded record. You light the candle, put your hand over the cover, and speak plainly. You don't need to sound like you swallowed a medieval play or something. You're not reciting Shakespeare. Just say something that you mean. Say something like, this book opens for true work. This book closes against idle hands. Let what is useful be remembered. Let what is harmful be marked. Let every name written here be handled with care. Let every working recorded keep its lesson. Then touch the salt and mark the inside cover with a small sign that makes sense in your practice. It might be a cross or a pentacle, a key, maybe a small circle, or a personal sigil, or simply your initials written with intention. Touch the water and wipe the cover lightly with damp fingers, just enough to wake the book and set it apart. Pass the key over the book 3 times and say, open for work, closed for curiosity. If you use smoke in your tradition, pass the book through smoke from rosemary, maybe frankincense, cedar, whatever protective incense belongs to your tradition. Use scents with old books. A fragile family Bible doesn't need to be smoked up like a ham. Keep the smoke near the book and say the prayer over it instead of risking damage to the pages. Sit with the book. Read what you can read. Protect what needs protecting. Remove what should be kept careless eyes. And for your own working book, the best spell is honesty. Write down what you did. Write down when you did it, what changed, what happened. Write down what it cost you. And write down when you were wrong. That's what turns a notebook into a working book. So when you find another worker's book in a drawer, remember this. Finding the drawer gives you access to those papers. It doesn't necessarily give you the right to handle the work. I'm Papa G, and this has been the Feral Folklorist. Next time, we're talking about Married in Red, ghostly brides and wedding curses. A wedding is supposed to bind 2 people together, but old wedding lore keeps warning us that some bindings trouble the house long after the ceremony is over, and some brides keep walking after the guests have gone home. So until next time, get out that blank book you've been afraid to write in and just write in it. If you'd like to hear the after the show episode where I go deeper into the folklore, spill a little extra dirt, and sometimes rant just a bit, consider becoming a patron over on my Patreon at patreon.com/PapaG. You can find the official site for the podcast at feralfolklorist.com. And if you need spell supplies for any of the workings we talk about on the show, our metaphysical shop, Remedies Botanica, has been weaving magic for over 25 years. That's over at remedies.com.